Alrighty, let me get the stream to everybody. Good morning, good morning. Okay, let's see. We just had the building permits, the core durable goods, housing starts come out. Nothing unanticipated so far. Good morning. Let me go ahead and pull up the heat map for you all to see. Hold on. There we go. All right. Good morning. Okay. So markets are very, very green this morning. We did have some news in the overnight. There was a very large deal between Japan and the United States, I believe for $500 billion, something like that. Now, with that said, we are going to start going over some of the market signals because there is a lot of different um, signals going on. And I apologize if I sound a little spacey and everything today. My daughter's sick right now, and I'm starting to get her cold, so starting to get congested and everything, so I do apologize if I space out a little bit. Anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at our Forex market first. So we do have the dollar moving up. We do have the yen moving downward. In the pre-market, it is moving downward as well, so it is continuing to lose strength. That's not really good for the market. That pretty much means that the Bank of Japan will need to continue unwinding positions. Let's check the USD JPY. Good morning, everybody. Welcome on in. USD JPY, seeing a little bit of strength. Nothing super, super big, but it has moved up solid, almost 50 cents so far in the pre-market. Now, some other signals I've been looking is that UVIX and UVIXY in the pre-market are seeing a little bit of volume. Okay, so volatility is still there, a little bit. We are seeing, hold on, scroll over to the HIG. We are seeing a decent amount of buying on the HIG in the pre-market. So that is showing that, again, corporate credit is holding fairly strong. Seeing liquid not having exactly buying in the pre-market, not exactly selling either. It's just kind of holding neutral. Does say, it is red currently, but I don't really count that as red. Now, some of the things I'm looking at with QQQ Semiconductors SPY is that, and let me pull up the drawings, I apologize. They look terrible, just one moment. Is that very, very quickly going over the channels, is that between these two white channels, this is the major consolidation range. Basically, if we're within these channels, we're generally going to trade from the bottom of those channels to the top, and from the top of those channels back towards the bottom. Okay, I did not mean that channel. The yellow liquidity channel is kind of a cautionary zone. It's a zone that we see the market trade within quite a bit, but generally we see it bounce upward out of it. So far this is bullish in terms of the movement out of this area. The red range is generally a major selling range. meaning when we get in that range, generally we sell down almost all the way to the bottom. Now, when we enter this red range, we generally do not stay within the range for a very long time. It's usually just a quick, dip in and out for liquidity, but it's still a very, very cautionary range because we keep trying to push for it. And on top of that, let's see, my drawings disappeared on that one. It is on socks, so is that basically we still have a lot of the same structure going on within the S&P, within semiconductors, where it looks like we have this major cup and handle occurring, but it's actually a very large inverse cup and potentially forming the very large handle downward. We can see this a lot better within QQQ. Turn these drawings off. Those channels don't matter right now, but we can see this a lot better within QQQ, especially on the 4-hour time frame. We can see how this previous cup has entirely broken down. From this cup breaking down, this has formed an inverse cup to the downside. Now we're just really looking for continuation of that structure. Um, I'm not seeing major bullish structure yet, so even though we are seeing, buying in the pre-market, I'm really not seeing anything that's suggesting major upside just yet. We do have this very concerning consolidation channel on QQQ. Doesn't look like a very wide range, but it is still about a $15 range. And as long as we're below this consolidation range, that generally will mean that very, very likely the odds are we will bounce downward off of this range. Now, that isn't always the case, but generally these consolidation ranges are either we're going to make a major push into that consolidation range and trade from the bottom of that range to the top, or we're going to reject the range in this area and, continue the push downward. On the daily time frame, we're seeing the ADL, which is again probably the most important indicator out there. It's basically like a bank account or savings account, whatever you want to call it. If it's moving downward, that means funds are leaving the symbol slash ETF, whatever you're tracking. If it's moving upward, then funds are entering it. Over the last few sessions, we have been seeing a tiny bit of funds entering it, but it's still, very, very concerning. Ever since we hit the previous top, it's just been descending, descending, descending. I haven't checked the chat yet. Sorry if I'm skipping questions. I will go over them in just a minute, though, if there is any. With semiconductors, we've been seeing probably the most bullish action overall in terms of this entire sell-off. Technically, with how semiconductors are positioned right now, we still can see a bullish breakout. The ADL has been a little choppy, but during the sell-off, we've been seeing a lot of weight shifting into semiconductors, and this was a point that I've brought up multiple times is that even though we were seeing tech selling off, we still saw major weight holding up in semiconductors, which definitely can allude to potential, bullish upside once the volatility leaves the system, things like that. TLT, not seeing major buying in the pre-market, but again, things are a little overextended right now in terms of some of these instruments and basically like the VIX, TLT, um, some of these instruments that haven't been used so much lately are now kind of pushed above their upper Bollingers, and because they're pushed above their upper Bollingers, that actually creates a short position entry. So even though um, I'm not really expecting TLT to start entering into a sell-off, this does create the conditions where we can have a very small reprieve in the TLT buying, retest support, continue upward. But again, I do attribute a lot of this TLT buying towards the Bank of Japan. And again, the reason why I making that correlation is because we have been seeing um, high yield corporate credit super, super strong. Generally, if we're seeing domestic selling, we will generally see the HIG selling off. We will generally see liquid selling off, and we haven't been seeing that. We've been seeing, um, you know, a lot of buying within liquid, and HIG hasn't exactly been buying to the upside, but it's been holding its weight. So, um, a lot of mixed signals in terms of both selling and buying. Good morning. Yeah, silver is doing very well right now. I did buy some shares at 65.48, something like that yesterday. Whenever I made my post. So we are doing very well. Go ahead and pull silver up. So one thing that I'm seeing right now is that we're entering I don't really want to call it bullish conditions because I don't really think what's going on is bullish. I do think that this is kind of pushing upward so that the Bank of Japan can continue unwinding. Um, we've been, and by we, people in the group, and some of the more experienced traders have been noticing that a lot of the selling has been taking place in a lot of these bullish structures. I've been talking about this for the last few weeks where a lot of the structure has been extremely, extremely bullish. We've been seeing bullish signals within the credit markets. We've been seeing bullish signals where we've been seeing the dollar dropping. Um, but yeah, we've still been seeing selling. So really, I don't think we're out of the woods with the selling yet. Going over the moving averages, we have the daily 5-day moving average, excuse me. Uh Currently at the 685.99, but because we closed yesterday at the 682.85, very likely means that the 5 mile will be around that 684. I I'm really thinking around that 684.60, but it could be a little lower, could be a little higher. And really, where we see the current market price right now, go to the 5-minute time frame and turn off moving averages, is pretty much right at that daily 5 mile. Um, so are we just doing a 5 mile test? Potentially, right? And potentially we're doing a 5 mile test with extremely bearish structure here. Okay, sorry that cup's handle kind of messed up, but we do have an inverse um, cup and handle here. And what that generally alludes to is a head and shoulders. Okay, and a head and shoulders will break this smaller bullish buying channel. This buying channel does not hold a lot of weight. It's literally just from yesterday and the pre-market from today. So it doesn't hold a whole lot of weight, but we can see this break down very, very quickly if we re-enter this liquidity range, which currently the market price is actually within. Then we can see this pull down again very, very quickly, break this buying channel, and down we go. Okay, so before I jump into anything else, is there any questions that anyone wanted to go over while we do have some time in the pre-market? I do want to save probably the last 15 minutes of the pre-market to finding a scalp, but after we find that scalp, we can go over, further lessons and everything. Again, I do apologize if I sound sick. I'm sick because my daughter brought home a really nasty cold. So anyway, With that said, um, good morning, good morning. Sorry, I'm not trying to ignore chat. I don't have my office completely set up yet, so I'm still just on my laptop. I don't have all my other monitors set up, so when you guys are typing, I can't see it unless I tab into the screen. So I do apologize if it sounds like I'm ignoring you. Um, with that said, we're seeing a lot of weight entering into Lockheed Martin in the pre-market. Generally, a lot of strength enters into Lockheed Martin when we're seeing a lot of selling. Not always the case, but as you can see within the last few, and I don't want to say few, but basically since um December, when the SPY has been within that major consolidation range where it pulls up, looks like it's going to break out to an all-time high, sells downward, rinse, repeat. Meanwhile, we've been seeing a ton of weight being pushed into LMT. So defensives are still rising. With defensives still rising, that still is, a major cautionary signal for me in terms of trying to buy the tech upside. Just going to bounce around a couple symbols really quick. Now I am shorting Exxon still. I am still looking for this 20 mod range, but we are having some news where potentially President Trump is, um, you know, upping the stakes with the whole Iranian conflict right now. So seeing a little weight in oil. Completely okay with that though. I really do expect this 20 mod test to occur. We've been seeing quite a lot of, quite a lot of weight leaving oil, and I'm not just looking at Exxon as that, but we've been seeing that within the futures. We've been seeing that within multiple different symbols, even though it looks like they've been pushing, you know, into a ton of weight. CVX, same thing with CVX. We've been seeing the ADL starting to pull down. So some signals that a lot of these symbols really do want to come down, retest support, then continue the push upward if they're going to continue doing so. Checking precious metals. Let's go ahead and look at gold. Gold is seeing quite a lot of buying. Again, we're kind of in that position where it's basically what we've been seeing over the last few months. I can pull up the SPY correctly, where on these major buys towards the upside, we're seeing the yen drop, we're seeing the dollar rise, we're seeing volatility rise at the same time. A lot of signals that are telling us that yes, things are bullish, but again, things can break down quite a bit. We've rejected the upper Bollinger 3 times in the last, 2 months. That's a very, very bearish signal. Um, actually 4 times now that I look at it. So 4 times in that period of time. Um, very bearish signal overall. Generally, if you are expecting the market to be really pushing upward, generally it's trying to grab upward into the upper Bollinger to create new ground or new levels towards that upside. We're not really seeing that at all. Instead, we're actually seeing the lower Bollinger being pushed into. So this does kind of allude to some of this price action we saw back in last February, last April. So we're not entirely there yet, but again, we do need to be extremely cautious, and we still have quite a lot of weight for the Bank of Japan to truly unwind still. If I can pull up the USD JPY and then turn off Bollinger's moving averages. I showed this in last night's video, but this was the previous two major unwindings. This was in 2024 when we had the end of July, early August unwinding. We saw the USD JPY go from 162 all the way down basically to that 140 range. When we saw the unwinding from January, basically February, all the way to April, again, that went from 158, 159 basically down almost to that exact same range again, the 140. So we're still very far from that. Um, still have quite a ways to go in terms of unwinding positions here. And with the new obligations with Japan and the United States, that doesn't exactly ease the situation. Um, it might actually kickstart it a lot faster. So as bullish as the news is, there's quite a lot of signals that are telling us that things can, turn into selling very, very quickly. Trying to pull up the yen. This is that same example, except with the yen. This is the 2024 unwinding, the 2025, and sort of what I anticipate from the current unwinding. So we have a lot of way to go, and we're still seeing a lot of, really potentially scary signals. Even within Bitcoin, again, I attribute a lot of Bitcoin's price action sort of to what I expect out of equities. So when we see Bitcoin continuing to sell off, that's really alluding to that equities are going to continue selling offward. Again, ever since we hit the all-time high with Bitcoin, we've been seeing the equity market really, really struggling to push new grounds. And yes, it did hit two new all-time highs, basically at that 696 range and the 698, if I remember correctly. Um, but they were very, very slow moves. Um, so, okay, done talking for a second. Is there any questions before we start trying to jump in and find a scalp? And I'm going to mute just for a second, just so I can drink my coffee, but we're going to start looking for scalps in a moment. As you can see on the SPY, this is that channel that I was talking about. It did break. Now that doesn't really fully allude to the that this channel is broken. Technically, this channel can push downward, create some new support in here, and then push back upward. So currently, we're just going to keep it at the previous support. But if we do see actual bullishness within the market today, then we will mark this as a, new support. Anyway, I will be right back, but I'm here. Look into Apple. Okay, we will take. So this is working out really good. I don't know if you were the one that commented back in I want to say about a month ago when Apple was getting ready to push into the upper Bollinger. But we had a comment on the video basically asking about Apple, and I said that it would be a really, really good short at that upper Bollinger range. And so far, we're seeing this short play out pretty much to a T. It's always great to see when these opportunities happen. So, very awesome. Now, with that said, okay, turning off the drawings here, we do see Apple. Just take a look. And I want to look on the weekly time frame just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so here's what I am seeing with Apple right now is that on the weekly time frame, and I apologize for the previous drawings. This is from that one video where we had the comment. Um, on the weekly time frame, okay, we do have this extremely potential cup and handle forming here. And let me go ahead and delete some of these other ones. Now, I don't really agree with this cup and handle. I don't think that this is that structure. I think that this is an inverse cup that failed to build a handle to the downside. And from that inverse cup, this is its own new structure. Okay. With this being its own new structure, I generally want to see some structure forming. Generally, I want to see either potentially this is being a double bottom, but so far we actually have an inverse cup and handle forming here again. So on the weekly time frame, things can get fairly bearish. We are seeing the 5 mile still hold its ground, so not exactly the best signal either. Now, in terms of the daily time frame, this is that inverse cup right here. Apologize that it doesn't look very good. Um, but what inverse cups like to turn into, if they actually work out correctly, is that generally we see a lot of these inverse cups turn into head and shoulders. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, that's not a head and shoulders. But in terms of liquidity, it still holds a lot of that same structure because this can be a fair value gap. Okay. If this is a fair value gap, then that means that this selling has been filled out and that currently when we see the price up here, that really this should be pretty much right there, creating that head and shoulders. So truly this shoulder would be right there. Okay. From that head and shoulders, we see it breaking down. Fair value gap basically doesn't matter. That area doesn't really exist. It's been filled out. Seeing this head and shoulders breaking down, and what is that alluding to? It is alluding to this chunk of liquidity right there, okay? Because it is pointing down towards that. And what will that create? And I will delete some of these drawings in a second, is a very large inverse cup, okay? So that's kind of the expectation right now is that for the long run, we should be still seeing Apple selling off for quite a bit. Um, with the moving averages, let's see, closed at 263. The 5 mile will be pulling down. It's still about another day or two from having the 5 mile cross underneath the 20 mile. However, we do have the 5 mile crossing underneath the 10 mile and the 50 mile. Okay, so two very bearish signals there. Really just need to see the 5 mile cross underneath the 20 mile. Again, if Apple holds this price or lower on close today, then the 5 mile will be below the 20 mile, and then this is basically full on bearish. This is pretty much positioned to push into that lower Bollinger again, unless you see support bought up very, very soon here. Oh yeah, I figured it was you asking about that. Um, so hopefully, I hope you're still within that short position. It still should be good towards that downside. Um, it can be a little confusing because the structure does look potentially bullish, but I really don't think that it is. I really don't think that this is the cup with the handle forming that breakout. It just doesn't seem like it at all. Okay, we have 28 minutes until open. I am going to start looking for a scalp, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Again, the plan for today kind of is that we're going to look for some potential scalps or, some potential swings, some sort of decent trade. And after that, we will go over the moving averages very, very briefly in terms of how to spot longer term trends. Going to mute my mic just for a second so I can drink my coffee without having to make slurping noises in all of your ears. All right, so one thing that I've been looking at for a while now, I believe I talked about this I believe I streamed on Friday. I really don't remember. It's been a long weekend. I apologize. If I remember correctly, I streamed on Friday, and if I did, I believe I talked about ASTS. We did have that lower Bollinger move. We did have the day two lower Bollinger where we did see the lower low. So we are starting to see ASTS become a pretty decent buy towards the upside. The 5 mile is currently at 88.19. Pre-market price is at 83.62. So yes, you have lost a little bit of that upside if you didn't buy as of, basically yesterday. Um, with that said though, the 5 mile will be pulling down towards that 86 range. So there's still roughly a whole two and a half, $3 of upside. That's just assuming it retests the 5 mile and rejects. Okay, so assuming that it actually tries to reclaim some of this weight to the upside, then it could be a very, very strong mover. This is the type of trade where I would do something for that 5 mile upside. And then if you see the 5 mile actually have a successful test and we start heading up towards that 20 mile, then you start taking some leaps for basically the gap fill all the way back up to the 130. Could be a very, very nice trade, and those contracts would probably be fairly cheap. Excuse me, if I could talk correctly. Now, before we're going into the scalps, I am looking at the daily time frame over everything, just kind of trying to get my bearings, seeing if I notice any major structure that I want to engage in. We talked about last week how charter be an extremely good short. And this is kind of one of those examples where we had with Apple just a few minutes ago. Um, if you took those charter puts, you'd be doing extremely well right now. Oil pushed up in the pre-market, but again, I am expecting this retesting of the 20 mile and potentially below that, so I am shorting oil right now. CNC, not wanting to short. Coin had a really good long. We did talk about that, but I wasn't wanting to go long. I was just wanting to take it as a scalp. But this has, potentially been a very good long if anyone took that opportunity. Carvana can be a nice trade. Not today. Um, we do want to see it push down further, but if we get that lower Bollinger Day 2, then that can open up some really, really nice calls to the upside. Did not mean to click that. Chevron, again, kind of same thing with oil. Really expecting a lot of oil to retest their 20 mile. DraftKings down pretty low here. DraftKings looks pretty gross here, but it's actually a pretty strong buying opportunity. Again, buying at the lower Bollinger generally turns into a fairly strong upside buy. Just two examples here, and those other lines are literally from early 2024, late 2023. Lower Bollinger moves here. Both of these moves would have tagged from, let's see, the 32 and the 26 all the way back up to the 36, almost the 37. So again, that's quality trade. This could once again push up and create a very nice trade. I won't be engaging on it, but just pointing it out in case anybody wants to. We're continuing to see the dollar climbing in the pre-market, which isn't really a good signal. That's not what we want to see. We have about 20 minutes here, so I'm going to really start flying through. It's just a little bit. Talked about gold being a good buy. Welcome everybody who is joining me this morning. So Google's really one of the major culprits in terms of why we're seeing so much weight loss out of QQQ, it looks like. That would have been a really good buy if we caught that lower Bollinger move. Hims. I know I've been asked about Hims, so let me go ahead and take a look very, very quickly. Again, I'm really looking for this 1350 range. We'll just circle that. I do think we should tag that area. Again, there's a lot of structure here telling us that this wants to form that inverse cup. Sorry, it got squiggled over there. My finger kind of slid under my mouse. And from that low, it should be a good buying opportunity to the upside for at least an equity buy. With the shares, when we decide to enter, if we get our entry, would be 13.50 roughly each. Not exactly the most expensive trade to take. Very large share buy in market on liquid. LMT still seeing pre-market strength. You can see my old buying range. I took those up to 110, and I wish I held them longer. Microsoft back within a major consolidation range, which is still telling me that very, very likely it wants to attack that bottom area. Good morning, good morning. So we're gonna look for a scalp here in a couple minutes. Now, Netflix definitely is within a strong buying range for equity buys. Definitely, definitely, definitely like that. Now, you can see a little bit further downside. However, you did have the lower Bollinger move occur here. So the upside is quite large. Not really looking to see this dip too much further. We do have a lower Bollinger rejection occurring here on the weekly time frame. So that is bullish. We do have this pocket of liquidity right here that they might try to go for, but again, with the shares being roughly $77 each, potentially jumping down to that 75 range, then that can, give us a pretty large upside compared to, the downside of re-entering that liquidity range. And if you enter that downside, then you just slowly DCA those shares. Should be a very quality trade. And we have 15 minutes until open, so I'm going to really fly through this for a moment here. I've been meaning to talk about RCAT for a very long time. RCAT is an extremely strong buy. It can push down further. If it pushes down further, it becomes an even stronger buy. Rig is a good short right now. Reason why, it's pushed above its upper Bollinger, secured the upper Bollinger day one, day two higher high, starting to pull down and consolidate towards the 5 mile. RSP is not seeing a ton of buying in the pre-market. Silver is doing very good. Our shares since buying yesterday are up roughly $4.30 a share. So that is awesome. Semiconductors are losing a little weight, but still very green right now. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and check the dollar. Just a moment. Now on open, what we're really looking for is what is happening with the VVIX. Currently, last I checked, the VVIX pulled down towards I want to say the 107. We do see the USD JPY continuing to push upward, which in overall market narrative and everything right now, that is bearish signal. So that is telling us that potentially the market can be selling off again. USO is absolutely flying. Not something I want to see, but that is for different reasons. We are seeing volatility slightly buying up again in the pre-market, but we do want to see the actual VPIX when it opens. It closed at the 107. Again, as long as it's above that 98 range, it is telling us that the market can sell off pretty much at any time, and we've been seeing that throughout the last few months. We do see the XSP pushing into the lower Bollinger. However, that was a rejection, now that I remember correctly. That is following within the SPY. That was a rejection at that level. So that does not count as the lower Bollinger Day 1. We are seeing treasuries pulling back a little bit in the free market, which again, that kind of alludes to the Bank of Japan going to be, continuing their unwinding very soon here. BlackRock, head and shoulders on the daily time frame. Okay, let's go ahead and find a scalp. So what we will be doing, opening the 5-minute time frame, and we are looking for a symbol that, again is a preferably one of the mags, but a very high market cap, and looking for it to be pushed below or above the lower or upper Bollinger, and we will determine if it's a good scalp that way or not. Now, I personally don't like the contracts on Adobe, but this would just be an example. When you push into the upper Bollinger, generally, and this is talking within the 5-minute time frame, of course, generally the expectation can be that you're going to push or pull back down into at least the 5-minute 20 mile range. It creates a very good shorting opportunity. So even with Adobe currently at, let's see, the pre-market is 261. This means that potentially you could short down all the way to the 260.82. Now that isn't a whole lot of range, but that's just an example. I am just going to be very, very quickly jumping through these here. Google potentially could be a pretty decent scalp. I do want to see it push down a little further, so we will circle back around to it. But again, it can be a pretty decent scalp to the upside. Ideal IWM can be a really nice short here, especially if we see a push into that upper Bollinger on the open. Um, Again, on the 5-minute time frame. Let's go ahead and check other structure. This is telling me it does want to break down again. So yeah, this could be a very potential short position here. You have a very nice head and shoulders on the 5-minute time frame. You have, your market price starting to push that upper Bollinger, which that's exactly what we're wanting. Do have not the best amount of room yet, but what I would be looking for is for IWM to pull probably up towards that 263.50-ish range, maybe even the 264. I don't really expect the 264, but 263.50-ish range. And then you should have at least a full dollar the downside, and that's just assuming this head and shoulders completes that right shoulder, not seeing the actual completion of the structure itself. It can push down well below that 262. So potentially IWM. So Google, IWM, we'll circle back to those. Ellie Lilly, potentially a very nice buy towards the upside. These contracts can be fairly cheap at times. So with this pushing into the lower Bollinger, that basically creates a whole $25 to the upside in those contracts anyway. Let's see, Meta, not really what I'm looking for here. As you can see, there's a potential head and shoulders on the daily time frame. So ideally, what I'd be looking for is a position to support that. So I would want a position that is pushed into the upper Bollinger, meaning that I can continue shorting this rather than trying to buy a call to scalp the upside. So I do want to play towards the daily time frame as well. We have 5 minutes until open. Oracle can be a bullish upside. Um, I'm still looking for a little bit further downside in terms of the daily time frame though. So I would be a little concerned about that. Palantir potentially could be a good scalp. Does look like it wants to reject that lower Bollinger so far. So the call upside could be pretty decent here. Um, Market is pushing pretty high though. I'd really want to see this push to that lower Bollinger. Um, the move was occurring a little bit, but it is starting to pull back upwards. So really just wait for that lower Bollinger push if you're going to engage on that. Okay, let's go ahead and check Google again. Apologize if my voice cuts out, by the way. Starting to get a pretty bad sore throat right now. TSM could be very nice buy. TSM could be a potential pretty strong scalp here. There is a lot of liquidity at this 363. So potentially look for that push down towards that 363. If you get the push downward, then potentially you could get a really nice contract um all the way up back towards that 369, 370 range. So a lot of range or a lot of potential with that one. I actually think we're going to watch that. Um, because again, even with selling sort of being what I anticipate overall, I still have a lot of bullish upside in the grand scheme of things. So we are getting this level. It's looking extremely good. Pre-market pulling down right to that liquidity level. So this is opening up almost exactly to what we're looking for in terms of a scalp. I'm taking a look at the contracts right now. Excuse me. And let me see if I could find something that is not just cheap, but also nice. Okay, within TS, no, that doesn't have contracts. I want, hold on. Just one moment, everybody. I'm trying to find something with actual decent options here. Not seeing the options I really want here. Now, you can engage into these 370 calls for 2 days out. It's not exactly the worst trade ever. Um, technically, the scalp is playing out so far. Now, I do want to take a look at SPY. Let me go ahead and turn off the drawings. There's the SPY really having that head and shoulders we talked about. Um, filling that liquidity range with that head and shoulders pushing downward. Now we're looking for not just calls to the upside, but we're looking for whether the 5 mile is going to see buying basically at this level or selling at this level to really determine the next trend in the market. We have the VVIX very elevated still. It's at basically 108. It opened at 108.66, so pulled down slightly, but it's still climbing up a little bit, which is again very, very concerning. Go ahead and look at the SPY, and I'll take a look at TSM in a moment. SPY on the 5 minute time frame is having that scalp opportunity. I'm really not wanting to engage this yet though, but the scalp opportunity is there. I would just take it up to the 20 mile range and cut it there, but again, um, really not a position I want to engage in yet. The 370 calls on TSM are up a whole dollar so far. Let's take a look at the VVIX continuing to push upward. So again, that is a major concern for me. Exxon, I'm shorting Exxon, so just give me a moment because I don't want to buy an option on it. Okay, let's see if I get my order filled. Um, anyway, let's take a look at the VVIX, and then I do want to circle around to. Okay, cool, got my contract. Circle around to semiconductors. Semiconductors pushing downward. They are starting to climb back up towards their upper or their lower Bollinger, likely to retest the 5 mile and the 20 mile. And again, this is on the 5 minute time frame. So those calls would have worked out very well. Excuse me. We're still seeing the yen pulling downward. So again, this is very, very cautionary. This is telling us that the Bank of Japan can continue to unwind positions. Let's go ahead and take a look at IG. IG is seeing a little bit of buying this morning. Let's look at liquid. Again, I always look at these because these are the high yield credit markets or, the investment grade credit markets. Um, Always very indicative of whether the overall market's going to sell or not. Q really starting to push down. Where is the 5 mile on QQQ? 5 mile on QQQ is at 603.66. So if we continue to reject that level, that can be a 5 mile rejection. With QQQ not having the lower Bollinger move, those last two trading days, we can push down towards that lower Bollinger if we do reject this. Let's go ahead and circle back to the VVIX. Seeing continued weight within the VVIX, and this is a bearish signal. USD JPY seeing a lot of weight today, so again, a bearish signal. TLT has been pulling downward. Not really a bullish or bearish signal, but in the narrative currently, it is a bearish signal because we've been seeing the market buying TLT because of the Bank of Japan unwinding. Below the 5 mile on the SPY. So now we need to see basically, are we going to hold this level or are we going to see a drop? We continue seeing a lot of weight within the VVIX. So this is still telling us that potentially we can, um, you know, be pulling downward, as bullish as the day is looking. See, I wasn't ready to engage on those QQQ calls yet. Really don't like trying to engage on calls here again. Overall, I'm seeing bearishness. Um, Ideally, really not wanting to engage calls. Will engage calls if the opportunity is present, but again, we're seeing the dollar extremely elevated, seeing the yen continuing to drop. The HIG was buying up fairly decent. Now I'm seeing a lot of orders for selling. LMT did have pretty decent buying, has pulled back a little bit. That can be a bullish signal for the market because LMT is a defensive. If money isn't entering into defensives, generally it's going to be entering into equities. We're seeing QQQ having a little bit of a bounce. Again, I really expect this to pull up to the 5 mile and continue rejecting, but it can pull up to the 20 mile, and this is on the 5-minute time frame. Silver is continuing to do very, very well. Semiconductors still struggling. Let's go ahead and look at the VVIX again. Still extremely elevated. Take a look at Oracle down pretty hard in pre-market. Not pre-market, but in the open anyway. If QQQ, SPY, and semiconductors cannot hold their 5 mile ranges, then we will see the majority of the market pull downward. 5-minute time frame, we're seeing pretty decent head and shoulders starting to build. Again, this can be a cup and handle forming, so this doesn't entirely mean that it's bearish yet. With this head and shoulders being here, very, very likely we do need to see a little more consolidating within this right shoulder, build it out a little further, then push downward. So really looking to see the 5 mile tested out a little further. PVIX still extremely elevated. Let's take a look at TSM. TSM pulled upward towards the 5 mile, but is starting to reject again. So semiconductors really seeing a lot of struggling today, but this selling can turn around and turn into buying very, very quickly. So just be, cautious of that. Yeah, I'll take a look at IWM. IWM pushing well above that upper Bollinger. So we did talk about taking short positions. So I am going to look contracts one more. Okay, so it's very, very close to that 265. Premarket 61. So the 262, um, 0 DT puts and the two, um, DT puts look very, very good. The 2 DT are about $150, so $1.50 per option. Um, Again, I think this is a very, very quality scalp. Even with this upside pushing very, very heavily, I still see a lot of reasons to take that scalp. Currently, those 2-day expiry contracts are 146. So, um, starting to hold that level. Let's go ahead and circle back to the VVIX and then I will swing back around to it. Seeing a little bit of pulling down, and again, just going to show the drawings, but this is our danger zone still. As long as we're above the 98, this can turn into selling very, very quickly. So VVIX, even though it might be red on the symbol list, still extremely elevated. So be very, very cautious trying to buy the upside. SPY, we're seeing again the 5 mile being tested. The 5 mile is currently at the 684.60, so basically that exact level that I said in the video and what we expected in the pre-market. So with that level being at the 684.60, that means that we should fully anticipate the 686, almost the 686.80 and the 682. Okay, we did get the 682. So that is the lower bounds of the 5 mile test. Going up to the 686.80 range will be the upper bounds of the 5 mile test. Rejection from that range. So if we start seeing the VVIX climbing as we were pushing into that range, very, very likely will allude to a rejection of the 5 mile. So we'll just continue monitoring things. VVIX pulling downward. QQQ seeing some of that buying weight. We talked about how those calls, even though I really didn't like it, those calls could go from the lower Bollinger on the 5 minute time frame up to the 5 mile, potentially the 20 mile. I expected a rejection at the 5 mile, but potentially can be rejecting this 20 mile range as well. If we see continued buying above this 20 mile range, then very likely those calls will take all the way up to the upper Bollinger. So those calls would have been a potentially very, very good scalp. Just again, I wasn't extremely comfortable with taking that position. Check IWM and continuing to push downward. Big seeing a little buying weight, but still fairly weak. And I still think taking that put scalp on IWM is still very, very strong here. Overall, the structure doesn't really allude to um seeing continued pushing upward. It is at the upper Bollinger on the hourly time frame as well. So this does support that very, very likely IWM will be pulling downward. Now, the safe exit on this scalp would be at the 20 mile range. So currently that's the 263.24. Um, it really depends on how far you think those contracts will go. I think that potentially these can swing all the way back down towards that 261.85, potentially even further down than that. So really exit at your own risk, but the safe thing to do is once you get back down to the 5 minute 20 mile range, set a stop loss there and allow the contract to either continue gaining weight or safely cut out. We're seeing LMT starting to buy its way back up again a little bit. I'll look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin not really doing a whole heck of a lot yet. DXY seeing a little bit of a pullback, but that's because it was pushed up on the 5 minute time frame. Very likely this will continue pushing upward until we see the Bank of Japan unwind positions. Let's check the VIX. Apologize that I sound extremely tired, by the way. I'm just not feeling the best right now. BVIX, again, still very elevated. It has pulled down a little bit since open. Um, this still isn't really telling me so far that this is alluding to bullishness within the SPY. So just be very, very cautious of that. We're seeing a little bit of rejection on SPY from the 20 mile range on the 5 minute time frame. Again, this is sort of alluding to that 5 mile rejection potentially occurring. Seeing a lot of signals that this upside buying isn't going to be sticking. So really liking the short positions here today. I wish oil would pull down. That would make me happy. Let's see. Junk bonds, not really seeing major weight. Apple's continuing to push downward. So that short position should still be doing very, very well. Hold on, I'm gonna look at IWM in a second here. Seeing some rejection from Google. Gig is really not seeing major buying here. It's not seeing weakness here either. It's just kind of holding its weight. So not bullish, not bearish. Liquid is seeing a little bit of selling here. It has lost about a whole 40 cents off the top, so that is a little bit bearish. The IWM short would be going good. Those contracts are up to check. They're about 153 currently right now. And I still think there's a ton of room on those IWM puts, so definitely look for that 20 mile on the 5 minute time frame to really exit if you're wanting to exit. Yeah, you're very, very welcome. SPY, we're continuing to see that rejection, and I want to circle around to the dollar and the yen, continuing to see weakness within the yen. That right now is a overall bearish signal because that is telling us that extremely likely the Bank of Japan is going to be stepping in any second. Same with the dollar. If we see the dollar start pulling down very aggressively, then very likely we will be seeing the market pulling down with it. The reason why is because the dollar pulling downward is showing that there is an excess amount of dollars within the system. Well, where do you get an excess amount of dollars in the system from? Generally from selling securities. So that is, going to be one of the main signals to look for that the unwinding is really going to be occurring today or not. Same within the yen, so the FXY. If we start seeing this pull up very, very aggressively, that's going to be a signal that the unwinding is going to be, starting to occur again. QQQ still struggling to hold its weight. Silver, awesome. SPY still sitting at the 5 mile. And again, SPY is still working on this larger head and shoulders. So I kind of expected to be sitting at this 5 mile range for a while. USD JPY, we're looking for this to pull downward. Once this starts pulling downward, very, very likely this will allude that the market or, equities overall will be pulling downward. So be cautious of that. VVIX has pulled upwards slightly since pulling downward since the open. So this is still, again, kind of alluding to that we can see that unwinding occur. Exxon needs to dump, not for any other reasons other than I'm shorting it. Yeah, I could take a look at silver. Silver. Silver is still doing very, very well. Um, on the 5-minute time frame, again, you can expect this to see some volatility. Generally, throughout pretty much the entirety of most time frames on silver and gold, you don't see them holding the range below the 20 MA for very, very long. So if you're wanting to scalp silver, which yes, you can do, it does work very well. The contracts do actually carry a lot of weight. Um, really look for either the short or the upper Bollinger to the lower Bollinger, or try to buy the lower Bollinger, I mean, excuse me, the upper Bollinger to the 20 mile, or try to buy the lower Bollinger towards the upper Bollinger. Let me go ahead and take a look at IWM. Again, I'm not very concerned about this here too much. It's pushed, excuse me, my voice is cutting out. It's pushed above the upper Bollinger on multiple time frames. We see this on the 5-minute, 30-minute, the hourly, and very, very close on the 2-hour time frame. Not super close on the 4-hour time frame. So, um, this push upward shouldn't last too much longer. It is overextended by multiple metrics in terms of these lower time frames. On these longer time frames, overall, still is bearish overall. Um, Currently, we're testing the upper bounds of the 5 mile range. So generally, and let me really zoom in on this. So each of these moving averages, the 5 mile, 10 mile, 20 mile, when we test those levels, I look for what I personally call it the upper bounds and the lower bounds of the moving averages. So with the 5 mile currently being at that 263.24, I'm really expecting the price to see both the 261 and the 265. Now, we are seeing that 265 range. Okay, so that is telling us that we are testing the upper bounds of the 5 mile right now. And if we look at the low of the open today, we see that the low is the 261.85. So that does align very well with our lower bounds of the 5 mile as well. So what I'm really expecting is that the market is testing both the lower bounds and the upper bounds. Doesn't mean that just because we're in the upper bounds of the 5 mile right now that we're going to push through it. There's many times where we see the price action sit at that upper bounds range and then reject downward. So really keep your eye on that. It could be kind of chopping at this range for a little bit before that rejection if we're going to truly have that rejection. On the 5 minute time frame, again, I see all the signals that we're looking for this short to work out. QQQ starting to become a short as well, starting to extend above the upper Bollinger on the 5 minute time frame. Let's take a look at the VVIX and just make sure that volatility is still present. It is. The VVIX is still very elevated. We're truly looking for this to pull down multiple dollars if we're going to be seeing the bullish upside. So this being slightly red really doesn't tell us that um that upside is going to be secured so far. SPY, we're just continuing to test the upper bounds. The 5 mile is at the 684.83. So again, we should be truly expecting the 686.80 range. Let me take a look at IWM again. Yeah, there's multiple reasons why I would want to short this. Um, Even on the hourly time frame, we have this cup, which generally when we complete a cup, you're looking for bearish structure at the top of that cup. So generally shorting the top of a cup is one of the best opportunities to short because you're looking for that handle downward even as a bull. So with that handle downward, you have the potential to not only have the bullish cup handle form, but you have the potential of the full-on rejection, excuse me, occurring of the cup, which sometimes that does occur, where you buy the top of the cup formed, you have the top of the handle created, short the top of the handle, pull downward, and then the buying just does not kick in. And we see the rejection all the way down below the bottom of that cup, validates that cup, and then all of a sudden you have a super, super killer position. So, again, everything I'm looking for here in terms of a short I'm seeing, even this slight overextension here, this still looks extremely, extremely good as a short position. Seeing SPY pushing above that upper Bollinger. Now, one thing we do have to be cautious of is that potentially this could be forming a cup here, which again, kind of the same thing that we just discussed on IWM. If this is forming that bullish cup, then we are looking for the bear structure at the top of this cup. So regardless, this is still a quality short position. And if this is going to be a rejection of the 5 mile, then this is the um, upper upper bounds of the 5 mile range. So very, very quality short here. Silver is doing very well. Let's go ahead and take a look at IWM, and then I will check the currencies, seeing slight tapering within the ADL here. Starting to see IWM push pretty well to the point that I actually might take these puts here. BVIX is starting to pull down. Still extremely cautionary to me, especially with it pushing into the lower Bollinger. That can mean that it can swing back up very quickly. We have our actual VIX almost near the $20 range, which doesn't push us into that bearish territory yet, but it pushes us very, very close to it. So a lot of concerns still. See SPY within that upper bounds range. Expecting the rejection to occur pretty soon here. Semiconductors are pushing very well. Seeing some buying within the HIG. Overall, that is a bullish signal. FXY hasn't started seeing the buying yet, so in terms of equity price right now, that is kind of a bullish signal because that's showing that the Bank of Japan isn't unwinding yet, which means that they're not selling their positions yet. Dollar still is elevated, meaning that again, the Bank of Japan hasn't started unwinding yet. Bitcoin still seeing a lot of chop, have a potential pretty gnarly head and shoulders building right there on Bitcoin as well. Let's take a look at Nvidia. Nvidia is pushed above its upper Bollinger as well. Do you have this inverse head and shoulders on Nvidia on the 30-minute time frame? Nvidia is starting to push into the upper Bollinger though on some of these longer time frames, which can be a bearish signal. Semiconductors are still pushing, so a lot of that weight will continue pushing into the SPY. BVIX continuing to pull down, so overall this is a bullish signal, but still not the point where I want it to be at. Again, I want it to pull down quite a bit more. We've seen this pull down all the way to the $100 range and then have a major bounce off of that. So We're really not out of the woods yet as much as this buying might be implying. IWM still just pushing, but again, still all the signals that I'm looking for. Um, I would continue holding that position. No, not yet. A lot of these breakouts, they can look extremely, extremely bullish. However, a lot of this bullishness can taper out very quickly with how fast they're pushing, with how quickly they're pushing. And this is just an example on the top 5 minute time frame with semiconductors. But we see how we have this very, very bullish push all the way from the 356 up to almost the 360. And from that upper Bollinger range, we reject all the way down to the 353. So, massive rejection there. Generally, once we start pushing into the upper Bollinger, that's when you start anticipating bearishness because that's kind of the edge of the road. Um, and that's actually specifically why I make these Bollingers white to kind of mimic what a road would look like. So if this is, the left side of the road, right side of the road, generally you want to be on your road. You don't want to be going off-roading. So if we're pushed above the upper Bollinger or below the lower Bollinger, that kind of means that you're off your road. Generally, the price wants to navigate towards the center of the road and being on the road again. So that's how I try to trade overall is I look for overextensions or um I can't think of the word right now, but I underextensions. I know that's not it, but um that's generally how I look to trade because those give you the absolute best entries. Um and we can look at some of these on the daily time frame too. And we go ahead and pull some of this up. One moment. I want to go ahead and look at the VVIX and everything really quick before I show this example. IWM. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I apologize. Again, I'm still not concerned with IWM. We are starting to see it taper a little bit from this upper Bollinger on the 5 minute time frame. I apologize. Um, really, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that taper. From that taper, we should be seeing and fully expecting that 20 mile range. From that 20 mile range, um, either that's when you exit, or if we see continued weakness at that range, then you hold for the lower Bollinger. I'm gonna turn my mic off for a second just because I need to get a drink. One moment, everybody. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Okay, so I want to go over this example and Before I do, let's just very, very quickly cycle through everything so that we know for a fact that nothing is going haywire on us. So, Bitcoin, again, that correlate a lot of what we expect out of the equity price to occur with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is pretty much like 99% institutionally owned now. With that said, they're going to trade Bitcoin very, very close to how they're trading the rest of the equities. So generally, we can see a lot of the selling or buying within Bitcoin hold a lot of that weight with the overall equity market. Doesn't go one to one, but it can be a signal. EXY still very elevated with the yen being very, very weakened right now. We're looking for the dollar to pull downward. That will be a selling signal in terms of equities because that'll mean a plethora of dollars are entering the system. Why do a plethora of dollars enter the system? It does that because, people are selling securities to, get dollars in their hand. FXY, this is the yen. We're looking for this to pull upward, kind of like we're looking for the dollar to pull downward. Same reason. If this is pulling upward, that means that people are buying the yen. That goes hand in hand with the unwinding throughout the Bank of Japan. IG is still holding that neutral stance, not really buying, not really selling. I'm seeing buys and sells through the time and sales on the actual I can't think of the word right now, I apologize. But the order book, um IWM slowly, slowly tapering liquid, kind of seeing that same neutralness that we're seeing out of the HIG. NVIDIA, we are starting to see pull back a little bit from that extension into the upper Bollinger. So that is sort of alluding to what I was talking about, how that extension to the upper Bollinger can create those really bearish conditions where if NVIDIA starts seeing major buying, that can carry over throughout QQQ, SPY, semiconductors. So these bullish overextensions can sometimes turn into really, really bearish conditions. Same within QQQ. We start seeing the tapering off of this upper Bollinger. Same thing can apply there. RSP. We are seeing overall buying in the RSP, which overall I guess would say is a bullish signal because that's showing that the equal weight SPY is seeing significant weight being pushed into it. Um, Sometimes this can be misleading because you can see significant weight pushed into, say, a defensive, where generally on the SPY, that's not going to move the SPY barely at all. But with the RSP being a equal weight ETF, that can move equal weight a lot further than what the actual ETF itself would move. Head and check the VVIX. Still elevated, but has been dropping a little bit. Sort of the same thing I said about NVIDIA with it being pushed into that upper Bollinger. Same thing with the VVIX here. It being pushed into the lower Bollinger can create those bearish conditions. Um, I should say bullish, but bearish because this is the VVIX, where we could see volatility start picking up and, selling with overall equities. Dollar starting to pull down, not a whole ton. just a little bit, seeing a little bit of weight to the yen. Not a whole ton though. BVIX continuing to taper out, so again, just be very cautious of that. If this decides to, have a very, very large leg downward, then that can allude to a very large buy to the upside. Now, potentially, we're seeing a bounce off of the 5 mile range, but it's a little too early to say that just yet. We still see volatility fairly elevated. We still have the 5 mile below the 20 mile on the daily time frame. Go ahead and swing back to IWM. I wasn't blind and could actually find the symbol. For some reason, IWM is always the symbol that I can never find. Starting to see that taper. You can see here how it's starting to slowly pull away from that upper Bollinger. Very, very likely this is going to lead into weakness to the downside. Not always, but for the most part, that's 90% how these trades will go. Sometimes you can see these upper Bollinger extensions, but even within here, this is a really good example actually, where we see a major extension into the upper Bollinger, still holding that range for a little bit, finally pulls down to the 5 mile. However, from that 5 mile range, we see it pull back up into the upper Bollinger, but from that upper Bollinger, it's back down to the 5 mile. So there are the scalps we had here. Generally, you don't see it pushing into the upper Bollinger and just continuing to push the entire session. Starting to see that taper slightly. Granted, I know we want a whole lot further. Dollar continuing to pull down slightly. Again, that can be alluding to people selling positions and getting an influx of dollars. BVIX still tapering out. Nothing really poking out too much yet. Um, those TSM contracts would be up quite a bit. I didn't take it, um, but hopefully someone did because you'd be up a whole $5 on that contract. Now, again, today is a very low data day. Pretty much all the data has been released. We do have the FOMC meeting minutes releasing at 2 p.m. However, I don't really expect a whole lot from those. Um, the last 1 to 2 meetings really haven't been very contentious, even though we have had some dissents within the FOMC decisions. Those dissents have been very well documented and very expected. So Nothing poking out too much yet so far. Just really waiting for some of this price action to start idling out. We talked about how those meta calls could potentially be really good this morning, but not something I wanted to engage on. Those ended up being really good. Silver is just cruising on up still. Semiconductors starting to pull back slightly. Yeah, nothing so far is telling me that those previous positions need to be cut yet. Sorry, excuse me. BVIX is still extremely elevated, starting to slowly taper to the upside just a little bit. Again, we saw this the other day, and let me actually just go ahead and pull this example up. But we saw this the other day where for the majority of the session, we saw the VVIX losing steam. And this was actually a day I was fairly bullish on because I was expecting this to really pull below that 98 range, which would really signal bullishness within the market. Well, we didn't get there. We pulled down to it was the 116, somewhere in that cent range, but pulled down to the 100 and basically blasted off. So as long as this is above that 98 range, it's very, very, very concerning. So again, um, not trying to like scare tactic or anything, but the VVIX is still extremely elevated here. So don't be thrown off in terms of seeing buying throughout the SPY and everything and assuming that we're going to be blasting through some of these levels. Just trying to see some increased buying within LMT, which again, that's a defensive. Let me go ahead and look at ONS. And DS, let me make sure I got it right. Okay, let's see what we got going on here. So this is actually the perfect example to talk about trends, which this will answer your CC question. Okay. And I'm going to flip drawings here. I want to make two rectangles. We're actually gonna make four rectangles in the end, because that will better illustrate what I'm talking about. So just bear with me. It's going to be red. It's going to be green. Okay. So this is kind of how I look at every single symbol. And this is on the daily time frame, and I'm not looking at moving averages right now. I'm just purely looking at the Bollinger Bands, the middle Bollinger, which is the exact same as the 20 mile. So, um, as you could see, both the 20 mile and the middle Bollinger exact same level. Um, the middle Bollinger is tracking the 20 mile. That's why the length is 20. Anyway, so what this is showing here is that in this yellow range, this is bullish because if the price is above the 20 mile, generally you'll see the 5 mile and 10 mile being above that price as well. This means that you're going to be in bullish territory. Okay. This isn't exactly buying range, but this means that generally you're going to be pushing upward. Now, when you're within this blue range, that's generally showing that very, very likely the 5 mile is below the 20-day moving average, the 10 mile is below that 20-day moving average. That overall, very likely you're seeing bearish price action in here. Again, not really a range to buy or sell, um, but this is very, very likely where you're going to be seeing the majority of your bearish price action, the majority of your bullish price action. Now, when we enter the upper Bollinger, that's this red range, this starts becoming where you get bearish. Okay, even though you're seeing a breakout in the price, this becomes your bearish range. And the reason why this becomes your bearish range, and this is the perfect example here, you want to put rectangles to really solidify this, is that upper Bollingers generally turn into rejections. Okay, so that's when you start getting bearish. Now, when we handle the actual upper Bollinger mechanics correctly, you can time, the whole bullish upside and the bearish downside very, very well. Um, I've made mechanics for that, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're just talking about overall trends. So this is where you sell CCs. Okay. Up in the upper Bollinger is where you sell those CCs because you're not going to be seeing continued pushing. Okay. Um, this is where people buy calls get completely burned because the upside isn't going to continue too much further up there. Now, can you see the upside push up where, for example, in this range, get the candles correct, where we did have that move looking like it went from the upper Bollinger right back to the upper Bollinger? Well, this move did have a 5 mile test, and that is exactly what we're looking for those upper Bollinger moves. So, can you push back up into that upper Bollinger from that 5 mile? Absolutely. But that 5 mile needs to be where you close that CC out. So, you would get the top of that move to that CC range, okay? Or the top of where you sold your CC to that 5 mile, closing on the 5 mile if you see bullishness, and that would give you a very nice contract. A lot of profit to be had on that move. But really, you want to be trying to time your CCs into those upper Bollingers. Here is another example, because that's generally where the calls are going to be burning You know, generally don't see the price action continuing too much further above that. Just like in the lower Bollinger, that's when you start selling puts. Granted, I know selling puts kind of has a little more risk to it, and I know people say, no, it doesn't. Selling calls does. Um, I understand that risk, but the market is mostly bullish, so selling puts can be a little dangerous for that. Um, anyway, with that said, lower Bollinger moves, exact opposite of what we see out of the upper Bollinger. Those become ranges to sell puts. So ideally, I'm always trying to target either the upper Bollinger or the lower Bollinger. Those are always going to be giving you your best entries and exits. Um, let me show what I have my settings on. So the length, and I really hate that they actually name this the length. This really should be basically named after the daily moving average duration that you want to track. The length is tracking how many trading days you want to track. Okay, so if the length is 20, you're tracking the 20-day moving average. If you set this to 5, that's tracking the 5-day moving average. If you set it to 100, it's tracking the 100-day moving average. So this being at 20, this tracks the 20-day moving average. 20-day moving average is generally tested once a month. Generally, there's 20 trading days within a month. So that's really what we're looking for. The width being 2, that's going to give us our range on both the upper and lower Bollinger. So hopefully that answered the question in terms of how to position those CCs. Um, because again, it's very, very easy to take the upper Bollinger to the 5 mile, and if you see continued bearishness from that 5 mile test, then you're going to be able to take that upper Bollinger all the way to the 20 mile. Um, becomes a very, very safe position where you're not having to do a lot of guesswork. Because again, using the whole road analogy, when you're driving down the highway, you generally want to stay within the lines. Once you start pulling off the side of the road, you start hitting, the speed bumps on the side and it starts making your whole car shake. It's kind of the same deal here. Once you pull off the side of the road, uh, that's when the trend is going to be starting to change, very, very likely. Let's go ahead and look at our symbols again. Bitcoin seeing a little bit of bullishness. Dollar continuing upward still. Now, generally this wouldn't be bullish, but with the current market conditions, dollar pulling upward means that people aren't selling securities. So that's kind of the way to think about the dollar in the current moment. Yen is holding its weight. IWM is still tapering out. It is sitting at that 5 mile range, so have to be very cautious here. In terms of scalps, if we test the 5 mile, there is the potential that you can pull right back up to the upper Bollinger, or we can pull down to 20 mile. So keep that in mind. But again, we're seeing a lot of signals that is telling us that likely we will be pulling downward. Okay. HIG, I'm seeing a lot of selling within the HIG. It's not showing it within the actual price action, but within the actual time and sales, we're seeing a lot of shares being sold off right now. Let's check. Why? Still tapering off from that upper Bollinger push on 5 minute time frame. VVIX starting to pull back up from that lower Bollinger move. As we discussed, lower Bollinger can create those conditions where the VVIX can start pulling back upward. Volatility pulling upward generally is going to mean selling within equities. Actual VIX is still fairly elevated as well. Now, structurally, we did have this head and shoulders on the 5 minute time frame uh, become invalidated. So we are looking for further structure here. Potentially, we could be forming this cup and handle. Um, Really, I'm not seeing that playing out so far, but all the conditions are still there and present for that to occur. So, if we're going to be seeing that cup and handle breakout, then can be looking for that upper Bollinger on the 5 minute time frame, and we will be looking for the BVIX to continue downward. Take a look at IWM. Still just tapering out, seeing the ADL not exactly pulling upward. It looks like it's pulling upward, but that can be misleading sometimes because excuse me, it could be these slight bumps before, pulling back down again. However, on the 30-minute time frame, we are seeing the ADL starting to taper out. So overall, that is a good signal for the short. We're looking for the ADL to start pulling downward. Apologize, I'm losing my voice right now. Nvidia has been tapering out quite a bit from the upper Bollinger move. So that will be carrying a lot of weight throughout QQQ, semiconductors, and the SPY. I think I will. I think I will be adding to my position here. I do see a lot of signals that are telling us that, um, really we should be seeing this have a fairly heavy pull downward. Again, those upper Bollinger extensions generally don't last very, very long. Did any news come out on Bitcoin? Let's see. Nope, news yet that I know of. Let me check the actual bot. See. No, I'm not seeing any Bitcoin related news. There was a fire that broke out in Iran. That explains some of the upside in oil that we've been seeing. Now I just need this to turn into a head and shoulders and push downward. Okay, FXY still holding its ground. IWM still just holding its ground, starting to see that tapering with the ADL. Believe this is retesting. See, it's not even retesting 10 mall. So we're very, very far from the actual 20 mall on QQQ. So very, very likely we won't be pulling upward towards that today because that would be a whole $7 upside. Really do not see that occurring just yet. Still seeing the tapering within semiconductors, which again, that matches some of that tapering we're seeing within NVIDIA. Excuse me, VVIX still fairly strong today. I apologize, my voice is cutting out. I'm fairly sick right now because my daughter's been sick and I can feel it coming on. Semiconductors continuing to taper out. Should be seeing that tapering hitting Kiki by very, very soon here. Pig still just holding its level, yen holding its level, and the dollar holding its level. Bitcoin having a little bit of a extension above the upper Bollinger, but nothing super, super significant just yet. Continuing to see the VIX pull upward. Circle back to still just tapering out. Seeing significant taper with ADL 30-minute time frame. Same with the hourly. So it's starting to taper out a little more on the longer time frames. But really we're just seeing chop here. Not seeing a whole lot of signals one way or another. Granted, I do see that obviously the market is seeing some buying, but again, with the other signals present, it's not exactly safe to be buying into those or into the call upside just quite yet. Continuing to see that tapering within semiconductors. Starting to see a little bit of buying within TLT, which generally wouldn't be a major signal for the market, but with the conditions on the Bank of Japan right now, buying in TLT very, very likely indicates unwinding within the rest of the securities that they're selling off. You're very welcome. Sorry I sound so tired today. Starting to see Bitcoin pull back a little bit. If NVIDIA aims to push into the 20 mall on the 5-minute time frame, that will transfer a lot of weight throughout the rest of, the SPY, QQQ, semiconductors. And again, it's still a major concern that BVIX is still this elevated. Those QQQ calls would have been a really good scalp. Again, I just did not feel comfortable taking it. Um, I just take my positions, you know, based off of a whole plethora of signals. And if we are seeing a day where volatility is still, very present, then do I want to, potentially waste money on a call that can get burnt out? Um, Not so much. I mean, yeah, the trade and the opportunity was there, but with other conditions present, it makes it not the safest trade in the world. So, not really what I'm looking out of a scalp. When I'm looking for a scalp, I really want something that's going to be fairly safe. Nothing is pointing out to me too much. There is some room to short some Bitcoin related symbols. So let's look at master. Potentially master could be a really good short. Entire, $4+ downside. Very, very potential here. Um, if you don't want to take master contracts, you could also take Mastex, which is MSTX. A lot cheaper contracts, and you're going to get fairly close to the same amount of contract weight out of the move. So very quality. SPY not really opening a position yet until either we're pushed into the upper Bollinger for the shorts or pushed into the lower Bollinger for the calls. This is just a lot of chop currently. Still slowly seeing the VIX rise, so that is a concern. Continuing to see Bitcoin drop. If Bitcoin um fails this 5 month retest, then it will be pulling down quite a bit. The 20 month is at the 67,400 range, so quite a bit down from where it is currently. Just a lot of chop going on. All right, I'm going to be ending the stream fairly soon here. So if there's any other questions anybody wanted to ask, now would be a very good time, or I have to head out. Still feeling very good about these short positions. Again, with those extensions into the upper Bollinger, exactly what I'm looking for a short position. Granted, it just ended up pushing slightly above what we were expecting, but still what I'm looking for. NVIDIA is forming a little bit of a head and shoulders here. Probably see it a lot better on the 1 minute time frame. You can. So that can turn into further bearish structure to the downside, which that would, fit in with overall bearish thesis that we're sort of anticipating out of the day. Bitcoin is starting to fail that 5 mod test, which again can a lot of selling to the downside. BVIX is still slowly climbing. So again, that's really alluding to where we're going to taper out and sell off. Hi, good morning. Semiconductors still tapering. Just seeing a lot of tapering right now. Again, we need to see a major leg up or leg down within our actual important instruments here. Um, so far with the VVIX, I don't really consider this a massive leg down just yet. The VVIX can move, you know, multiple dollars within, a few minutes. So if we're going to be seeing really, really large buying to the upside, you really want to see a massive leg down in the BVIX. If we're going to be seeing the selling starting to pick up, then we're very, very likely just going to be slowly seeing this continuing pulling up towards that upside. What else am I looking for? TLT. Again, the buying within TLT currently does allude that or to the fact that Bank of Japan is likely unwinding positions. Again, I'm looking for it to pull upward to suggest that the Bank of Japan is going to unwind positions, and inversely, looking for the dollar to pull downward. Excuse me. Dollar has pulled downward slightly, but nothing very, very significant in here just yet. Bitcoin continuing to lose that 5 mile level. AWM continuing to taper in here. Still seeing the ADL pulling downwards, so overall that is a good signal for our IWM shorts. By pushing upward, but as you can see within the ADL, there is some mixed signals going on. The ADL earlier within the day was pushed up fairly well above where it is right now. Not really reflecting that within the 30-minute time frame though, so still some weight to be, consolidated in those long time frames. Okay, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here unless we have any last questions. Uh, hopefully today's stream, you know, taught some things. I know we're not seeing the exact price action we want within some of the contracts just yet, but hopefully that will change. Again, buying short positions within the upper Bollingers. Generally, what I look for across the board, buying long positions within the lower Bollingers. Generally, what I look for across the board. So, um, as long as those conditions persist, and as long as a lot of these other signals that we've been talking about are persisting, then I will be those positions open. So, um, with that said, I don't see any further questions. So I'm going to end the stream here. I will be doing a video again tonight, so I will talk to you all later tonight. And let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Remember, we do have the FOMC meeting minutes today at 2 p.m. I don't really anticipate much out of it, but on these low data days when there's literally no other data, sometimes that might be exactly what the market needs to have that major move to the upside or downside. So just be aware of that. But based on what I'm seeing so far, just a lot of chop. The upside I'm really not set on yet, even though I know a lot of people would probably call me stupid in Weeble chat, but when we see volatility as elevated as it is, you really don't want to be trying to chase this upside. Either you bought at this lower Bollinger and basically already are out of that contract, or you now have to wait for the next entry. Yeah, you're all very welcome. I hope you all have a great day. I hope that all of the contracts we've been talking about go the way that we expect them to go. So, keep me updated. I would love to talk about these contracts again tomorrow morning. And touch base on what happened. So, it's always good to go over your trades, and it's something I do personally. Each and every day, I'll go over um my entries, my exits, see what I could have improved on, what I could have done better, etc., etc. It's really how I've gone a lot of my trading methods. It's just going over the day, seeing what mistakes have been made, and continuing to improve on those mistakes. So not all scalps will work out exactly, but based on literally thousands and thousands of trades I've done, I'm always going to stick to those mechanics because they generally pay out. So okay, everybody, take care, have a great day, and I will talk